The rain had been falling for hours, turning the dusty market road into thick, sticky mud. Dim yellow lights flickered above the stalls, some almost burned out, making the whole place look tired and forgotten. Merchants shouted half-heartedly to passing customers, but most people only hurried past. Keeping their heads down against the cold wind, Elise, an old human trader with a long gray beard, walked slowly through the marketplace. His boots sank into the mud with every step, and the small sack over his shoulder felt heavier than it really was. Inside, there were only a few tools, some scraps of metal, and 2 small loaves of bread. He planned to sell before nightfall. He had been coming here for years, but the market seemed to be dying just like the rest of the town. As he passed the last row of stalls, something caught his eye at first. He thought it was just a pile of rags pushed against the wall of a broken wooden cart. But then, he saw movement, slow, weak movement, like a dying bird trying to breathe. He stepped closer, his boots splashing in a shallow puddle. It wasn't rags, it was a child, small, thin. Far too thin. Her skin was a pale blue, stretched tight over sharp bones. Her eyes, large and bright, even in the darkness, looked up at him. In her tiny hands, she held an empty tin cup. Trembling as she tried to lift it, Elias froze. It was clear she was an alien, though her features were soft and almost human except for the small ridges along her cheeks and the faint glow in her pupils. Her lips moved, but her voice was almost nothing, just a cracked whisper lost in the rain. He leaned closer. "What did you say?" But she couldn't speak again. A merchant from a nearby stall noticed Elias and called out, "Don't waste your time, old man." Elias turned, frowning. The merchant spat into the mud. "She's nothing but trouble, one of the last of her kind, and dying already." Another voice joined in from across the row. "No family, no owner, no value. She'll be gone by morning." Elias looked back at the girl. Her hands were shaking, and she was clearly too weak to stand. The rain soaked her thin dress, clinging to her small frame. He reached into his sack and pulled out one of the loaves of bread. When he held it out, her eyes widened slightly. But she didn't reach for it. She just stared, almost afraid. "Go on. Take it," Elias said softly. But when she finally tried, her fingers barely had the strength to hold it. The bread slipped and fell into the mud. Elias sighed, picked it up, and tore it into small pieces. Bringing one to her lips, she chewed slowly, as if every bite took all the energy she had left. Before he could give her another piece, a heavy voice behind him growled, "Step away from her." Elias turned to see 2 guards in black leather coats, the kind hired to keep order in the market. The taller one pointed at the girl. "She's marked for disposal." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Disposal. She's a child." The other guard shrugged. "She's also an orphan with no use. Can't work, can't be sold. She's just taking up space. Orders are to clear the streets by morning." The girl's glowing eyes moved from the guards to Elias, fear flooding her face. He could see she understood every word. "Leave her with me," Elias said, his voice firm. The guards laughed. "You want her? For what?" "She won't live the week. I'll take care of her," Elias said sharply. The taller guard stepped closer. "Not possible without a permit, and you're not on the list. Step aside, old man." Elias didn't move. He felt something in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. It was the same feeling he'd had long ago, when his own daughter had been sick, and no one would help. He still remembered holding her tiny hand until she slipped away. Looking at this alien girl now shivering in the rain, he knew he couldn't walk away. "I said, leave her with me," he repeated. The guards exchanged a glance, and one smirked. "Fine." "By her," Elias frowned. "By her. She's not property. To us, everything here is property." The tall guard said coldly, "Pay the fee, and she's yours to keep or bury." Elias clenched his jaw, reached into his bag, and dropped his small pouch of coins into the guard's hand. It was all he had left from weeks of trading. The guard counted quickly, then waved his partner away. "She's yours." "Don't say we didn't warn you." When they left, Elias knelt beside the girl again. Her eyes were still locked on him, confused but softer now. He lifted her gently into his arms. Shocked at how light she was as he carried her away from the marketplace, the rain began to slow. Her head rested on his shoulder, and he thought he heard her whisper something in a language he didn't understand. It sounded almost like Papa. He didn't know what it meant, but he held her tighter, somewhere deep inside. He already knew he wasn't going to let her go. Elias's boots squelched in the mud as he carried the small alien girl away from the dying marketplace. The night air was cold, but the child in his arms felt even colder. She was so light that he could almost forget he was carrying her. It wasn't for the weak rise and fall of her breathing against his chest. The road back to his home was narrow, winding between half-clapped stone walls and abandoned houses. The town had been shrinking for years, its people leaving for bigger colonies and safer planets. Now, only the poor, the stubborn, and the unlucky remained. Elias was all three. As he walked, he noticed a thin figure trailing behind them. It wasn't one of the guards they'd gone the other way, but someone smaller, keeping to the shadows. He pretended not to notice, keeping his pace steady, but he adjusted his grip on the girl, holding her closer. When they reached a small wooden bridge over the dark creek, the figure stepped forward. Blocking the path, it was a merchant from the Marquita, short, thin alien with long pointed ears and skin the color of rust. His eyes were sharp, but his tone was almost casual. "Old man, you don't know what you've picked up." Elias frowned. "I know she's starving." "That's enough for me." The merchant gave a dry chuckle. "Starving, yes, but that's not all. She's not just an orphan. She's marked." "I heard the guards say that," Elias replied, his voice low. "I don't care about their words. You should." The merchant leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Her people. They were wiped out in the border war. Not by accident. Someone paid for their extinction. Anyone left alive is hunted." Elias tightened his hold on the girl, who stirred faintly in her half-sleep. "Why?" he asked. The merchant shook his head. "Some say it's politics. Others say her kind has something rare in their blood, something worth more than whole cities. I don't know the truth, but I know this. If she's seen, someone will try to take her from you, and they won't be as gentle as the guards." The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but Elias felt the chill deepen. He had thought the girls' danger was simply being abandoned and unwanted. Now it sounded far worse. The merchant stepped aside, letting Elias pass, but his parting words lingered. "If you keep her, keep your doors locked, and your rifle loaded." By the time Elias reached his small homo-weathered wooden cabin on the edge of town, the girl's breathing had grown shallow. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, kicking it closed behind him. The warmth from the small stove filled the air. A welcome change from the biting cold outside. He set the girl gently onto the worn couch, removing her wet dress and wrapping her in one of his old blankets. Her skin was clammy, and he could see the sharp outline of her bones beneath. From the kitchen shelf, he took a jar of heated nutrient water, the kind travelers used for emergencies. He sat beside her and slowly tilted the jar to her lips. At first, she didn't respond, but then she sipped, her throat moving with effort. "Easy," Elias murmured. "You'll get more soon." She looked up at him then, her large glowing eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, he thought he saw gratitude, maybe hope, but just as quickly, her gaze darted toward the door, her body tensing. Elias turned sharply, hand reaching for the old rifle hanging on the wall through the thin window. He saw movement to shadows standing just beyond the fence. They didn't move closer. But they didn't leave either. After a moment, they vanished into the darkness. Elias lowered the rifle slowly, his mind heavy with the merchant's warning. Someone had followed them, maybe more than one. They were watching, waiting. Later that night, while the storm outside began to fade, Elias sat by the stove. Staring into the small fire, the girl was asleep now, curled up under the blanket like a fragile animal trying to hide from the world. He thought about his daughter. Again, the way he'd once carried her in the same way when she was sick. The helplessness he'd felt then was the same he felt now. But this time, he could still do something. His mind returned to the merchant's words. Rare blood. Hunted survivors. Danger. He didn't know what any of it meant yet. But he understood one thing. If the girl stayed here, sooner or later, trouble would come. Through his door, he reached for his coat and quietly locked the front door, sliding the heavy bolt into place. Then, he moved to the window and checked the shadows outside. Again, nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on them. Sometime past midnight, Elias woke to the sound of quiet footsteps outside. Not the wind, not animals. These steps were slow, careful, deliberate. He sat up silently, his hand going to the rifle. The sound stopped near the wall by the girl's couch. Then came a faint whisper in a language he didn't know, followed by the creak of the wooden floorboards on the porch. Elias moved to the door and threw it open, but there was nothing, only the damp night air and the sound of the creak below. Whoever it was, they had disappeared into the dark. When he turned back, he found the girl awake, her eyes wide and fixed on the open door. "They will come," she whispered in a shaky voice. The first clear words she had spoken to him in common. Elias closed the door and bolted it again. "They'll have to go through me first," he said quietly. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy and cold. Elias stood at the small kitchen counter, slicing thin pieces of stale bread and warming them over the stove. The smell of heat and wood smoke filled the cabin. On the couch, wrapped in the thick blanket, the alien girl watched him with silent curiosity, her glowing eyes tracking every movement. "You should eat," Elias said gently, offering her a piece. She took it with both hands, her small fingers still trembling. She bit into it slowly, chewing as though she hadn't tasted food in weeks, because maybe she hadn't. Elias felt a strange knot in his chest, half sadness, half anger. He wanted to know everything: who she was, where she came from, why people wanted her gone, but he didn't want to scare her. As she ate, Elias glanced toward the front window. 2 sets of muddy footprints led up to the porch from the road, then stopped at his door. No returning prints. Whoever had been there last night had either left without a trace or was still somewhere close. Just after midday, the sound of boots crunching on the frozen dirt road broke the quiet. Elias moved to the window and saw 2 figures, guards, the same ones from the market, walking toward his cabin. The girl froze, her piece of bread halfway to her mouth. "It's all right," Elias told her, though he wasn't sure it was. The guards didn't knock. They simply opened the gate and stepped onto the porch. Elias met them at the door, blocking their way. "You paid for her," the taller guard said flatly. "But there's been a change in orders." Elias's eyes narrowed. "What kind of change?" The shorter guard smirked. "Someone higher up decided she's too valuable to let go. You can keep her, for now. But you'll have to pay a holding fee each week. Protection costs money." Elias laughed once, bitter and low. "Protection from who?" "You." The taller guard's voice turned sharp. "From anyone who comes looking. We can't guarantee her safety unless you work with us." Elias realized what they were doing. It was a shakedown. They were hoping he would hand her back out of fear or pay them just to be left alone, but he wasn't going to do either. "She stays here," he said firmly, "and you're not welcome on my land." The shorter guard leaned closer, his voice dropping to a warning hiss. "If you keep her, you'll have more than just us to deal with." There are people who would kill you just to get to her." Elias didn't flinch. "Then I guess I'll need to make it a little harder for them." The taller guard gave a humorless smile. "You'll regret this, old man." With that, they turned and walked back down the road, their boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Elias watched until they were gone from sight. When he closed the door, the girl was staring at him. She tilted her head and in a soft, uncertain voice, said something in her own language. Elias shook his head. "I don't understand." She hesitated, then tried again in common, her accent thick. "Why? Keep me." He sat down in the chair beside her, leaning forward, "Because no one else will," he said simply. Her eyes softened for a moment, but then she lowered them, almost as if she didn't believe him. That night, Elias sat by the fire, working on repairing an old heating coil while the girl slept. Every creak of the cabin's walls made him glance at the door. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. When the wind blew harder, it rattled the shutters, and for a second, he thought he saw a shadow move past the window. He set down the coil and reached for his rifle. The floorboards creaked under his boots as he stepped to the door and cracked it open. Cold air rushed in, along with the faint sound of movement near the edge of the trees. He raised the rifle halfway, but before he could step outside, a voice called from the dark. "Elias," it was the merchant from the market again, stepping into the faint glow of the porch light. He looked uneasy, glancing toward the road before speaking. "They're coming sooner than I thought," he whispered. "Who?" Elias asked, his voice low. "Buyers. They heard she's here. Some will try to pay. Others won't bother asking." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. The merchant continued, "You still have a choice. Give her up now, and you'll live. Keep her, and you'll both be hunted." Elias's answer came without hesitation. "Then let them come." The merchant shook his head as if Elias had just signed his own death sentence, then turned and vanished into the darkness. When Elias went back inside, the girl was awake, her eyes wide. "They come?" she asked in a whisper. Elias nodded. "They'll try, but I'll be ready." She stared at him for a long moment, then pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Her lips moved as she murmured something in her own language, again quieter. This time, almost like a prayer. Elias didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was scared. But maybe, just maybe, she trusted him. What he didn't know yet was that her trust would soon be tested, and the price for keeping her safe might be far higher than he had imagined. The wind howled outside, rattling the old shutters against. The cabin walls, inside the fire in the stove, burned low, casting long, shifting shadows across the wooden floor. Elias sat in his chair with a rifle across his lap, his eyes half closed, but his mind fully awake. The girl slept on the couch, bundled in blankets, her breathing slow and soft. It was close to midnight, when a faint noise broke the stillness. Not the wind this time, no. This was different. A slow, careful crunch of footsteps in the frost-covered dirt outside. Elias's eyes snapped open, and his hand instinctively tightened on the rifle. He rose without a sound, moving to the window. The moonlight revealed three shapes moving between the trees. They weren't guards. At least not in uniform. These ones wore dark, tattered coats and hoods pulled low over their faces. One carried a short-barreled weapon slung across his chest. Another dragged something behind him, a sack. The shape inside long and narrow. Elias turned to the couch. Okay. The girl was awake now, eyes wide, staring at the door as if she had sensed them long before. "He did. They come," she whispered, her voice shaking. Elias knelt beside her. "You're going to hide, understand? Under the floorboards where they can't see you." Her glowing eyes darted toward the small trapdoor near the stove. He pulled it open and motioned for her to climb down. She hesitated, clutching the blanket tight around her thin shoulders. "Go," he urged. I'll get you when it's safe." She climbed into the dark space beneath the floor, her movements slow but silent. Elias lowered the trapdoor and pushed a rug over it just as the first knock came. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sharp, heavy pounding of someone who had no intention of waiting for permission. "Open up, old man." A voice shouted from outside. Elias didn't answer. The pounding came again, louder this time, and the latch rattled under the pressure. He stepped to the door, keeping his rifle raised but angled toward the floor. "What do you want?" he called. "We're here for what you took from the market." The voice growled. Elias feigned ignorance. "Took. I bought a loaf of bread and a set of screws." The reply was a cold laugh. "Don't play games." "The girl, give her to us, and we'll leave you breathing." Elias's voice was steady. "You're not getting her." There was a pause outside, then the sound of boots shifting in the dirt. "Then you won't be needing that door anymore," the voice said. The first kick cracked the frame. Elias stepped back, leveling the rifle. When the door burst inward on the second kick, he fired. The blast lit the cabin for a fraction of a second. The shot hitting the first intruder square in the chest. The man staggered back, falling into the snow outside. The second attacker lunged through the doorway, swinging a short blade. Elias blocked the strike with the rifle stock and shoved him back. The third man raised a pistol from the porch, but Elias ducked behind the table. The shot punched a hole through the wall where his head had been. Elias rolled to the side, came up in a crouch, and fired again. The second attacker dropped to the floor with a scream, clutching his leg. The one with the pistol cursed and disappeared from view. Elias's breathing was heavy now, but his mind was sharp. He kept his aim on the doorway, waiting for the next move. For a moment, there was silence except for the groans of the wounded man on the floor. Then footsteps, circling to the back of the cabin. Elias's stomach tightened. If they came in from behind, they'd be right over the trap door. He moved fast, grabbing the wounded man by the collar and dragging him to the door. He shoved him outside and slammed it shut, bolting it again. He ran to the back window just as the third attacker tried to climb through. Elias swung the rifle like a club, smashing the man across the head and sending him sprawling into the snow. The man scrambled up and fled toward the trees, leaving a trail of dark stains in the white ground. Elias stood in the center of the cabin, breathing hard, listening. The night was quiet, again too quiet. He moved to the trapdoor, pushed the rug aside, and opened it. The girl was crouched inside, hugging her knees, her glowing eyes wide and unblinking. "It's over," he said softly. Offering his hand, she took it slowly, her fingers cold and small in his. When she stood, she didn't speak. Instead, she stepped closer and leaned her head against his side. It was the smallest gesture, but Elias understood what it meant. She was still afraid, but she trusted him to keep her alive later, after he had barred the door and stoked the fire. Elias sat with the girl on the couch. "You need to tell me," he said quietly. "Why are they after you? Why risk their lives just to take you?" She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to speak. Finally, in a voice barely louder than the crackle of the fire, she said, "Because of what I am." Elias frowned. "And what's that?" The girl's gaze didn't waver. That one word settled in Elias's mind like a heavy stone. He didn't know all the details yet, but now he understood that protecting her was no small act of kindness. It was going to be a fight for both their lives and the people after her. Weren't done yet. The fire burned low in the stove, throwing a faint orange glow across the cabin walls. Elias sat in his chair, the rifle propped within reach, while the girl lay on the couch, eyes half closed but still alert. Every creak of the wooden floor, every groan of the wind outside kept both of them on edge. The attack from the night before had left the air heavy with tension. Morning came, but it didn't bring relief. The pale sunlight barely cut through the thin mist that clung to the ground. Elias stepped outside to check the yard, his boots crunching over frozen dirt. The snow from the night had partially melted, but the footprints from the attackers were still there. They led off into the trees. Didn't return when he came back inside. The girl was sitting upright, blanket wrapped tight around her. She was staring at the door with a strange intensity. "What is it?" Elias asked. She shook her head slowly, but her glowing eyes didn't move from the door. He knew then that something or someone was coming. By midday, the sound of steady, deliberate footsteps approached the cabin, not rushed like the attackers. Not heavy like the guards, this was slower, measured. As if the walker already knew there was no need to hurry. Elias's hand moved to his rifle as a tall figure stepped into view outside the window. The man was an alien, though close enough. Too human in form, his skin was deep bronze. His eyes a hard silver that caught the light like polished metal. He wore a long coat made of some dark leather. And at his hip hung a curved blade that seemed far older than the man himself. Without knocking, he pushed the door open and stepped. Inside, Elias stood, keeping the rifle aimed but not yet raised. "You're bold," Elias said flatly. The stranger's voice was calm, almost polite. "I've been called worse." His eyes moved past Elias to the couch. To the girl, she had gone still, her knuckles white as she gripped the blanket. "I've come for her," the stranger said simply. Elias shook his head. "Then you've wasted your walk." The stranger stepped further inside, closing the door behind him. "You don't understand. She's not safe with you." "She's not safe anywhere, but with me." Elias kept his voice even. "And who are you to decide that?" The stranger's gaze flicked back to the girl. "I'm the one who's been keeping her alive since her world fell. I'm the reason she made it this far. You're just a man who bought her in a market because you couldn't walk away." The girl spoke then, her voice small but urgent. "Don't listen." Elias glanced at her, then back at the stranger. "If you've been protecting her, you're doing a terrible job. 3 men tried to take her last night." The stranger's silver eyes narrowed. "And you're still breathing. That means you're more capable than I thought." The man stepped closer. And Elias subtly shifted his stance, his grip tightening on the rifle. "You think this is about petty thieves?" The stranger asked. "She's worth more than the land under your feet. Whole factions would kill to own her. Some would carve her apart just to take what's in her blood." Elias's stomach tightened. Remembering the merchant's warning, "What's in her blood?" he demanded. The stranger hesitated, then said quietly, "Something her kind carries. Something that can heal almost any wound, cure almost any disease. In the wrong hands, it's a weapon. In the right hands, it's power beyond measure." The girl's voice shook as she interrupted. "He lies." The stranger didn't even look at her. "I've told no lies. You know it's true. That's why your parents were killed, why your people were hunted down to the last." Her eyes glistened, but she stayed silent. Elias took a step forward, putting himself between her and the stranger. "If you were really protecting her, why didn't you come sooner? Why let her starve in the street?" The stranger's jaw tightened, because hiding her meant keeping her in places no one would look. "You took her into the open. You've already made it harder." Elias could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The stranger was dangerous, but there was something in his voice that suggested he believed what he was saying. Still, Elias had seen enough in his life to know that belief didn't make someone trustworthy. "You have one choice," the stranger said. "Give her to me, and I'll take her to a place where no one can find her. Keep her, and you'll die trying to protect her. And so will she." Elias's reply was steady and final. "Then I guess we'll take our chances." The stranger studied him for a moment, then gave a small, humorless smile. "I expected that answer," he said, turning toward the door, but remember this, old man, when they come for her in numbers, you can't fight. You'll wish you'd let me take her. He left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. Elias stayed by the door for a long moment, listening for footsteps. When he finally turned back, the girl was watching him closely. You believe him? She asked. Elias shook his head. I believe you're not going anywhere with him. She nodded once, then whispered, they will come soon. Her words sent a chill down his spine, because deep down, he knew she was right. That night, Elias cleaned his rifle and checked every lock on the cabin twice. The stranger's warning still echoed in his mind. But so did the girl's quiet trust. He didn't know what the next attack would look like, but he knew it was coming. And when it did, he would be ready. The wind that night carried a strange smell, smoke and metal. Faint, but sharp enough to make Elias's instincts tighten. The girl sat close to the stove, wrapped in her blanket, but her glowing eyes kept darting toward the windows. She didn't say anything, yet Elias knew she felt it too. Something was coming. He moved around the cabin, checking every lock and reinforcing the shutters with spare planks. The rifle was cleaned and loaded, and 2 more magazines lay on the table within easy reach, in the corner. He'd placed an old hunting knife and a short axe. The cabin was no fortress, but it was what he had. The night was too quiet. Even the creak behind the house seemed muted, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then, faint at first, came the sound boots. Many boots, crunching over frost and dirt. Elias stepped to the front window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see figures emerged from the tree-lined 5-6. No more than a dozen. They moved in a loose half-circle toward the cabin, rifles and shotguns in their hands. The faint moonlight caught on bits of metal strapped to their coats' armor plates. Makeshift but functional, these weren't drunks or desperate thieves. These were people ready for a fight. The girl's voice broke the silence, low and urgent. Too many, Elias nodded grimly. Then we make them pay for every step. The first shot came from outside, a round that slammed into the doorframe with a splintering crack. Elias crouched low and returned fire, the rifle's sharp report echoing through the night. One of the attackers fell, the others scattering for cover behind trees and rocks. They didn't retreat. They were testing him, probing for a weak point. From the back of the cabin came the sound of glass shattering. Elias spun and fired through the broken window, hitting the man halfway through his climb. The girl scrambled to grab the spare magazine from the table and tossed it to him. Her hands shook, but she didn't hesitate. Bullets struck the walls, sending splinters flying across the room. Elias kept moving from window to window, never staying in one spot long enough for them to pin him down. He could hear them shouting to each other, trying to coordinate. Some were circling toward the back. He'd have to cut them off before they reached the creek. He grabbed the axe and moved to the rear door. As soon as he stepped outside, the cold bit into his skin. But he didn't slow. 2 men were already halfway across the yard, one carrying a coil of rope. Elias charged, swinging the axe in a wide arc that caught the first man in the shoulder. The second raised his pistol, but Elias slammed into him with his weight, knocking him into the snow. They struggled, boots slipping on the frozen ground. A shot went off somewhere behind him, and the man beneath him went limp. Elias turned sharply. Standing a few paces away was the stranger from earlier, silver eyes glinting in the moonlight, his curved blade dripping fresh blood. I told you they'd come, the stranger said, his voice calm, even as another man rushed him. With a swift motion, the stranger cut him down. For a moment, Elias kept the rifle aimed at the stranger. But then another wave of attackers surged from the trees, and they were forced to fight side by side, the air filled with gunfire, shouting, and the sharp ring of steel. Elias dropped 2 more men with precise shots, while the stranger moved like A shadow cutting down anyone who got close. Still, for every one they put down, more seemed to appear from the dark. From the cabin, the girl's voice called out, "Elias." He turned to see a man climbing through the front window. Elias sprinted back inside and tackled him before he could grab her. The fight was short and brutal, ending with the man crumpled on the floor. The girl's eyes were wide, fear and determination. Battling inside her, "You have to run," Elias told her. Through the back, into the trees, she shook her head fiercely. "Not without you." The stranger stepped inside then, blade in hand. "They won't stop." "This is only the first group," he said. "More are coming. We can't hold here." Elias's jaw tightened. Leaving meant abandoning his home. But staying meant certain death. Outside, the sound of engines rumbled closer, vehicles, heavy and fast. The stranger glanced toward the sound. They brought reinforcements. Elias looked at the girl, then at his rifle, then back to the stranger. "Fine," he said, "but you lead the way. You know where to take her?" The stranger gave a small nod. "Stay close to me." "Both of you." They slipped out the back, keeping low in the shadows. The attackers were still focused on the front, firing into the cabin and shouting orders. Moving quickly, they reached the edge of the creek. The stranger motioned to a narrow, hidden trail that wound into the dense forest. "We'll take this to the ridge," he whispered. "From there, we disappear." As they moved, the girl stumbled once, and Elias caught her. She looked up at him, breathing hard. "They'll keep coming, I know," Elias said. "And I'll keep stopping them." Behind them, the cabin that had been Elias's home for years lit up with orange fire as the attackers set it ablaze. The flames roared into the night. Elias didn't look back again. He had something far more important to protect now. The forest swallowed them whole. The glow of the burning cabin faded behind them until it was just a faint orange shimmer between the black trunks. Elias kept one hand on the girl's shoulder as they moved, the other gripping his rifle. The stranger walked ahead, his silver eyes scanning the shadows as if he could see through the dark itself. The path twisted uphill, narrow and uneven, forcing them to move slowly. Cold wind slid between the trees, carrying the scent of smoke from the destroyed cabin somewhere. Far behind, the sound of engines still echoed faintly. They hadn't been followed yet, but Elias knew it was only a matter of time. When they reached a rocky outcrop near the ridge, the stranger finally stopped. "This is far enough for now," he said, kneeling to check the ground for tracks. The girl sank onto a fallen log. Wrapping her blanket tighter around herself, her breath came in short, shaky bursts. And Elias could feel how cold her small frame had become. Elias crouched beside her. "We'll keep moving soon. You all right?" She nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on the ground. "You've been running for a long time, haven't you?" Elias asked. At that, her gaze flicked up, and she hesitated before speaking. "Yes," she whispered. "Since my world burned," the stranger looked over, his voice quieter than before. "You should tell him. He's already risked everything." The girl's lips pressed together for a moment, as though she was afraid the words themselves might bring more danger. Then she began. "My people. We were healers. We could take sickness and pain from others. Our blood could mend wounds, cure disease. That's why we never fought wars we didn't need to." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "But others wanted what we had. They came in ships, saying they would protect us. Instead, they took our children and killed the rest." She stopped, eyes glistening in the faint moonlight. Elias's chest tightened. "That's why they hunt you," he said quietly. She nodded. "I am the last child of my kind." The stranger spoke then. "And that's why you cannot stay in one place. You've seen what they'll do to get her." Elias looked at the alien man. "So where exactly are we going?" The stranger hesitated. "There's a place deep in the outer reaches. It's not on any map. She'll be safe there. Elias studied him for a long moment. Safe or hidden? Both, the stranger said simply. And right now, that's enough. They set off again. Moving deeper into the forest, the path narrowed further, forcing them to walk single file. Branches scratched at Elias's coat, and frost crunched. Under every step, the girl stayed close to him, glancing back every so often as if expecting someone to appear from the dark. By dawn, they reached a small clearing with a frozen stream running through it. The stranger stopped, scanning the tree line. "We rest here for a while." Elias sat beside the girl on a flat rock. Letting her drink from the small metal flask he carried, she drank slowly, then held it back out to him. "For you," he shook his head. "You need it more." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. In her soft voice, she said a single word. Papa Elias's throat tightened. He thought back to the first night he'd seen her half hidden under a broken cart, shivering. He hadn't expected to feel this way about anyone again, but now, looking at her, he knew there was no turning back. The stranger returned from his scouting and crouched beside them. "The trail ahead will be harder," he said. "But if we reach the ridge before nightfall, we can cross into the no patrol zone. They won't follow us, they're too dangerous for their kind." Elias nodded. "Then we keep moving." Before they left, the girl tugged lightly at Elias's sleeve. "Why do you protect me?" she asked. "You could have left me in the market. You could have given me to him." She glanced at the stranger. Elias met her gaze and spoke simply. "Because you deserve to live. Because no one should face this world alone." Her eyes glistened, and she gave a small, almost shy smile. It was the first time he'd seen her smile at all. The last stretch to the ridge was steep and covered in ice. The stranger led the way, Elias following with the girl close behind. Every few steps, she would slip, and Elias's hand would steady her. By the time they reached the top, the sun was sinking low, casting the valley below in gold and shadow. From up here, Elias could see for miles forest, river, and beyond that, the faint shimmer of a distant settlement. The stranger pointed toward the horizon. "That's where we go next." 2 days' travel. After that, she'll be beyond their reach. Elias looked down at the girl, who was staring at the view with wide eyes. He knew the stranger might be right, but he also knew this wasn't just about taking her somewhere safe. It was about staying with her, no matter where that was, that night. They camped under the shelter of an overhanging cliff. The fire was small, hidden from view, but it gave enough warmth to keep the frost away. The girl curled up beside Elias, her head resting against his arm. The stranger kept watch, silent as ever. Elias stared into the flames, thinking of the life he was leaving behind, his cabin, his quiet days of trade and repair work on. But as he looked at the girl breathing softly beside him, he knew he'd trade all of it 1,000 times over for this. He didn't know what dangers lay ahead. He didn't know if they'd ever truly be safe. But he did know one thing. From this night on, she would never be alone again.